Welcome to the Red River Medic Podcast, breaking rules, challenging norms, and changing EMS for the better. On this episode, we talk about resiliency and mental wellness with Pierce Provisions founder Brad Lawson. We have a conversation discussing proactive and reactive programs to prepare our teams for the rigors of the job, and how to respond as leaders when bad things happen or compound on our teams. We finished the conversation talking about the First Responder Summit being held in February 2026, to educate responders and leaders to develop strong, positive cultures in your organization.
Welcome to another edition of the Red River Medic. I'm your host, a paramedic and EMS director, David Grovedahl. This show is for the medics who aren't afraid to stir the pot, ask the hard questions, and challenge the "we've always done it this way" crowd. I'm joined today by Brad Lawson, owner of Pierce Provisions and an advocate for mental health and wellness with EMS providers. Brad is a former EMS administrator and educator, a community paramedic, who is now on traveling the circuit providing EMS education on topics of leadership, mental health, and work-life balance. Brad has transformed his own struggles into powerful educational conversations for EMTs and paramedics to help address and manage the stress providers face in the field. First Responder Wellness Summitt in February of 2026, bringing national speakers such as the Salty Paramedic and Paramedic Sophie, who are social media influencers on to the program, Brad.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you having me here, man.
Why don't we start off with you telling our listeners about yourself and what Pierce Provisions is and your mission and drive with the company?
Sure. So, a lot of the things, like you said, started a career a long time ago, back in the late 90s. I was a volunteer for a very long time. I did have an opportunity to be a supervisor and then moved my way into administration as a deputy director of an EMS agency. Spent a lot of time doing that and then moved over into the community paramedicine role. And that's where I sort of found that we have a lot of folks who need things and they don't always know where to look. So being able to be that community paramedic gave me an opportunity to connect the resource with the need. There's tons of resources in the community, and it's just about aligning that resource with the person that needs those services. And that's sort of the same thing that I kept going when we started moving into mental health and wellness. I've learned over the past few years that there are a lot of resources available, and we just have a really weak network when it comes to knowing where those services are and being able to connect our people to those services in the timely fashion that they need those services. So all this mental health and wellness stuff started 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. I lost a good friend of mine, and after his death, I made a promise that I would do more about bringing awareness and doing more in the realm of mental health and wellness. And so I started speaking, and it was called Saving Ourselves, a First Responder Mental Health Movement. And by doing those speaking events, it allowed me to be vulnerable with audiences and show people that, number one, it's okay, and that there are people that care about us and that we don't have to carry all the things that we see and go through on our own. And it just inspired several people to want to share their story. Got together, 3 or 4 of us, and we decided we would go somewhere and have a day where they could have a platform to share their story. I speak of how therapeutic it is for me to share my story, and those people wanted that opportunity. So I said, let's do it. And it just grew into this huge event. I think we have about 44 speakers that will be at the North Carolina First Responder Mental Wellness Summit that you mentioned. It's our first one in Wilmington. They've been great down there, offering to be the host site for us at Cape Fear Community College. And I couldn't ask for anything better for this first event. It's way beyond anything I could have planned. And it's all because of people stepping up and saying that, they are tired of the stigmas. They are tired of seeing their co-workers and even themselves suffer in silence. And so that now is just my motivator from day to day to keep doing what we're doing.
Now, you and we've both been educators. We've taught a lot of classes together, put on a lot of miles on the road. I know
Shady hotels.
On shady hotels. I know I've heard your talk, and in our classes we've talked about mental wellness. Can you tell us about why is this such a hot topic in EMS? What makes this so critical as something we need to be talking about with all providers these days?
I think mental wellness came from another conversation, and that conversation is burnout. We have so many providers now talking about being burnt out. You have paramedic students talking about being burned out. And so when we start looking at what's causing this, is it burnout? Is it being underprepared? All these different things that go into, well, what is the root problem? And one thing that I felt was happening is in the educational world, we're not adequately preparing people for the realities of what we see and how we deal with those things that we see. We always focus on, the high acuity, low frequency stuff, the run the cardiac arrest, the do the crike, whatever the case may be. But there's no talk about how do I take care of me after I've had that call and I'm having trouble sleeping, or I'm just second guessing myself now because I lost my first patient. We're not doing that kind of education, and we just expect people to deal with it and move on to the next thing. And so I feel like when we started talking about burnout, and that comes up in every class we ever teach, and it's something that we've started saying, you know what, we have to be completely honest. It's not always the cause that we're going on that's giving us this burnout. It's so many other things. When we look at leadership and the amount of calls that we're forced to have our people run, all those things play into the stress that we have. And so when we start looking at, we've got people that are only staying in the profession for 3 to 5 years. Geez, it takes 2 years to get your paramedic at least, so they're barely spending the time in the profession for any significant time past what it took to actually become a paramedic. And so we have to look at those things, and the mental wellness is one of those things that just comes up when we talk about why are people leaving. And it's where we have to make a decision. Are we going to do what's best for our mental wellness and ourselves as human beings? Or are we going to stay in this profession that is, everybody's starting to recognize we slowly kill ourselves if we don't do better coping and have a better plan for dealing with the things that we see and do. So I think that's where a lot of this is now becoming a hot topic. It's secondary to, we have a crisis with job placement and keeping people in positions. And so it's just one of the many things that are giving us difficulties there.
Now, you and I, we have spent many a time breaking bread and solving all of the world's problems at the dinner table. And so I know in one of our conversations we talked about wellness as a before and after type matrix. What can we do before to build up that resiliency that we need? We talk a lot about how do we respond after an event occurs, or when somebody is just compounding and compounding upon compounding. How do we help them after those things have happened? But what do we do on the front side? You talked about students in the classroom. How do we build that up with our staff, with our students, so that we don't lose them down the road?
I think when we're in the classroom, we've got to do a better job preparing them before they go to the clinical experience. Like you mentioned, we're pretty good with the reactive piece. If you ask people where do they stand with mental health and wellness, we've got a great plan. We do CISM with our people, and they have EAP. All of those things are reactive. We're very reactive in this profession, but we do need to be more proactive. And I think if we start in the classroom, we can better prepare these people. You can't let somebody see maybe the worst thing they've ever seen in their lives without a plan for how to process it and deal with it. But that's what we do. I can remember being a street medic, and I would make it a point to ask my students, what have they seen, what haven't they seen, and how have they felt under those circumstances? Because, when you look at provider wellness, that's a very, very small section at the end of the course in the book. And it's usually a read over this on your own as we're preparing you to take this exam so that you'll pass it. So I really think it starts there. We're already having to be reactive once we've let them experience that thing. That's something we can't take back. And so I don't think many students get the opportunity to really reflect on the significance of what they may see, and even if they want to see that. An interesting conversation that I've had with several people is, or an argument, shall I say, is the argument of, should I make my students see every dead body that we have on calls? Used to, I thought so. I was like, yeah, they need to see it. They need to, I felt like they were going to build some type of resistance to it or something, and that was early in my career. But now the older I get and I realize the things that I've dealt with in my career, why expose somebody to something without a need? If they don't need to see it, why expose them to it? Again, it's something you can't take back. And what I've learned through personal experience is I don't know what I can handle and what I can't, because honestly, I have broken down over a 78-year-old female in cardiac arrest, where in the past, that's just another call, but not after my grandma died. It was very impactful, and it made me feel differently about those kinds of calls. And do we need to put that type of psychological stress on somebody if they don't need to be in it? And of course, there's always going to be an argument for we should and we shouldn't. But I feel like the more that we expose people without having them prepared for the things that come after that, that's where we're letting them down. And just like anything else, we don't want to underprepare a student to go out into the workforce, but we're not doing everything we can to prepare them psychologically to deal with these things. And then 20 years later, you look like me and you've been through tons of stuff that you don't want to talk about on a podcast. And so you write a book. But we want to keep people from having to go through a lot of the things that many of us from our generation went through. And we see things differently now after we've had some experience in life. And, so I think that's where it's got to start. It's got to start in the classroom. By the time we get them as administrators in the agency, they've already been exposed to a lot of things in those times that they have to do. So I think that's where we have to build better relationships with educational institutions. Of course, they're fighting their own battles. They have very little time to prepare people to pass an examination. We're graded on their first-time pass rates, and so that's a really important thing. So there's, unfortunately, a lot of check boxing still going on, box checking, I should say. So when everything's a priority, nothing is, Dave. And so that's something that we've all just got to step up and say, you know what? The mental well-being of these people that we're putting into this, number one, most of them don't have any clue what they're getting into. Do you know how many students we have come in thinking this is just a glorified first aid class? So they have no idea what they're getting into to begin with, much less the psychological things that we're going to put them through with the things that we see and have to experience.
You bring up a really great point about in the classroom about dedicating time. We have to dedicate time to these topics, and we have to make it a priority and choose for it to be a priority within our organizations. I kind of think back to the topic of abdominal pain. When you're reading the literature, you're reading the textbooks about abdominal pain, especially in the early days when you and I were young paramedics. There's a paragraph, maybe two, on managing pain and in the abdominal pain, or excuse me, in the abdominal pain protocol. And so, I wonder in the textbooks how much pica space is given to mental wellness and managing that in our system. The other thing it makes me think about is what about in some of our sister organizations. I think about the fire department, and sometimes we make jokes about the fire station is guaranteed 3 meals a day in a hurry up and wait and in the recliners. But maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's something to sitting around the table and sharing a meal. I know we've had some of our best conversations just sitting at the table and talking about things, getting that time and space to open things up. Maybe at the fire station, working out is part of the regimen every day. Physical fitness, that circle of physical well-being and mental well-being and some sort of spiritual alignment. All of those things collectively benefiting our patients. So maybe there's something to be learned from that as administrators, we have to recognize those things. And I love what you said about you have to be proactive and reactive. And those are not the same thing. And so we have to have programs that acknowledge both of those things. How do we build up that resiliency and before and after?
I think
But
that brings up that magic word culture, right? When we start talking about the culture and being proactive, you have to think about, what's our relationship with these individuals before there's a problem? Because when I'm having I may not feel comfortable talking to the people at work if we are struggling with our culture. And that's why in past events I've spoken about, all the different tools that we have, and peer support is a tool. It's one thing that we have available to us, but it doesn't always work. And, some studies say it's only about 25% effective. And that's because of the cultures that exist in organizations where we don't feel comfortable talking to somebody or being vulnerable because we know these people every other day of the week. And so what we see these people doing every other day in the week makes us lose trust. Therefore, I'm not going to be vulnerable when we were just talking in the hallway about Bobby over here and what he's got going on. When all this happens, you know that they're going to be talking about you as well, or that is the way that a lot of us are led to feel. If they'll talk about them, they'll talk about me, and that's usually right. And so we lose that ability to have an effective peer support system if we don't have that good culture where we are able to trust our coworkers, trust our administrators, and and you said the magic word, space. Are we even allowing an opportunity for that to happen? And that's hard in what we do. And I think that's where you were going. The fire service is a little different. They have some downtime. That's sort of an unknown for most EMS agencies. But we have to find how to get better at it. We allow opportunity for these conversations to take place. How do we allow an opportunity for our cultures to improve? You have to be around people to get to know them. You have to be around them to start liking them, to start trusting them. And so that is something that I don't know what the answer is, because there's so many differences between rural and urban problems. We all have the same problems, but it takes different methods to provide solutions. So if I had the answer, we wouldn't have to go to work tomorrow, Dave.
that's exactly right. Andrew, are right. The firehouse is kind of that central location, and sometimes some agencies have that station, that community table, if you will, to sit down, break bread, have conversations. Disputums that's not always possible, and I think it's the table is a symbol. It's proverbial, and so where do we have those conversations? And I think, the ambulance bay, how many great conversations have we had sitting on the back of the ambulance after a call, taking those few minutes after we put a truck back together and just kind of talking about the call or talking about whatever, and three or four crews come together and it's just, all day long. Whereas one place you can always guarantee every ambulance is going to show up on every shift, and that's the ambulance bay. So maybe the ambulance bay is more of our table for building that culture. So what kind of other things do you think build culture? Because as an administrator, culture has always been something that's been a challenge to me to build. As when I walk in, it's, oh man, Chief's here. Got to be careful what we say. And it doesn't matter, how often I say, man, guys, what's said here is safe here. It's always you walk into the Chief's office, it's, oh, we're in trouble. No matter how often it's not the case, and really strive to do our best to not make it the disciplinary barracks. How do we build culture as leaders if I'm a street level supervisor or a director? Because I can influence culture. How do I do that?
Yeah, we've even seen that in the classroom, haven't we? Whenever we have a class, if there's administrative level officers, the class is completely different. They don't want to say the things and have that open, honest conversation. And you're exactly right. You can feel the air just get sucked out of the room when you walk in, regardless of how nice you are to your people. And I think that's just one of those barriers. And somebody has seen something done in the past, and that has built those walls. Is what I feel. So a lot of times we'll walk into positions and we inherit somebody else's actions. So even if we are trying to be that administrator that is being the team player, I want to allow space, I want to show you guys I support you, we're not the iron fist, this is not my office is only for discipline type deal, we're still going to be met with resistance because, at some point they put their hand on the stove and they got burned. And they remember that. And that's what makes it really hard for us as administrators is breaking through that. And, I think sometimes you maybe never will, but does that mean that we stop trying? Because that's where I see a lot of providers, when we talk about culture, we'll have the conversation of, well, all the dumb shit that goes on here, I just don't associate with them. I come to work, I go to my truck, I don't speak to anybody, I do my shift, and I go home. And then I was like, well, how is that helping the culture? Well, maybe it's not. That's exactly right. It's just like I'll compare it to bringing something to a vote. If we're following Robert's Rule of Order and we're holding a vote, if you say nothing, it's a yay. If you don't say nay, it's a yay. And that's exactly what we're doing. If we decide to just fold and say nothing, we're allowing that negative culture to win. Instead of, I'm going to show up every day. I'm not going to allow this to change who I am. I'm going to keep showing up, setting that example, and not letting something else get in the way. I feel like that's where we struggle as administrators. We have so many responsibilities. And I go back to when everything's a priority, nothing is. If we have so many responsibilities, at what point do we finally decide that this is more important than that? And you know as good as I do, when the boss comes down on us, it makes it hard. But, we can't let it look like we're choosing something over our people, because perception is reality. So even if we feel like we're not, if they see it as you are, what you feel doesn't matter anymore. And so I think that between allowing space and not quitting on it and having the open conversations as much as we can, we both know there's some things that just aren't able to be put out there for everybody. But as open and honest as we can, again, proactively, we can get some of that trust and answering a little bit of that why. Because that's what we need, right? If we don't answer the why, they're going to make up their own narrative. And so, I feel that it's a constant struggle. And if you're going to go into administration, that's going to be a battle every day for you, is the culture of your organization. I don't care how good you are or how bad you are as an administrator. You're going to have that problem, and you just have to day in check that gauge, just like it's the fuel gauge on your truck. And just make sure it don't go empty. You're constantly trying to do something to fill it back up, because it's always going to be there. I don't think we're ever going to have an agency anywhere that can say we have no issues with culture, because we all are human beings and we all see things differently all the time. So it's a balancing act, I feel.
That is so true. I think back to one of the leadership gurus and the 5 levels of leadership. And you're always in a constant state of flux in your leadership. You have people who are kind of at that level 1 where I follow you because you're the boss and I have to. And then you have people that are at level 5. They follow you because they believe in you. Total esprit de corps. And so you're always in this level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And people are constantly shifting in those levels with you. And so it's not a one and done. It's like you said, it's every day, the battle of hearts and minds. And the other thing I think about too is we talk a lot about the background, our EMTs and our paramedics who are having to go out and respond to calls, and maybe it's the lift assist on grandma for the umpteenth time, or it's the terrible cardiac arrest or traumatic arrest that we went to. But for leaders, that stress is there as well. And it's that push, pull, and tugging of senior levels and junior levels, constantly needing you and wanting you. It's, having to come in under budget. It's having to, when the budget gets that budget, it's dealing with the different personalities as a leader, and having to manage that as well. So I think too, on the ground, we absolutely 100% have to take care of our warriors. But we can't also forget our middle managers, the supervisors that are going out there backing up tough call after tough call after tough call, but also the leaders in the office, because I mean, I can speak from experience. It can be really stressful when the demands are, and me personally, I get physically nauseated and want to vomit when there's disciplinary. If an employee puts me in a position that I have to respond, as a QA officer I once had, she used to say that I'm only responding to the actions of the employee. I'm not doing this to you. I'm responding to what you did. And so that in itself is really stressful when you're having to do discipline or, God forbid, termination, which are necessary evils. But, it never goes well. I've yet to have that employee come up to me, shake my hand, and say, "Thank you for writing me up," or "Thank you for terminating me. That was the best thing that ever happened. I appreciate you so much." Or a social media post that says, he was amazing because he did this terrible thing, and now I'm having to deal with the consequences of my actions. So, what are some of the things that we should look out for in our staff when we're seeing somebody that's kind of passing down a pathway that we need to, before we have to significantly intervene? What kind of things should we be looking out for?
We talk about the flags, and if we think about like the stress continuum model, I know we talk a lot about that when we do mental health resilience officer classes. And so we look at just the daily activities and what's changing on that little level of individuals. And that's hard to see unless you form those relationships. So going back to what we said earlier, are we facilitating relationships in the workplace to where we can recognize the little things? And I think one of the most dangerous positions to be in is that employee that is just doing par. That employee that they just come to work, they do their job. They are never above achieving or above achieving, high achieving, but they're also not late or low achieving. They're just going with the flow. And it's easy for those folks to go under the radar and get missed. So it's all about having these relationships. And, the relationships are impossible at an administrative level to have a real strong working relationship with every one of your employees. So you've got your limitations there. So, but we have to have crews that are looking out for each other and recognizing the little signs. When something tragic happens, we always talk about, oh, I never would have thought it would have been so-and-so. But then when we start reflecting a little bit, we start noticing that there were little things that we didn't think were things in the moment. We didn't slow down and take enough time to really analyze the little things. It could be anything from, somebody just sending you a text message saying, "Hey, you got time to talk?" But we didn't get back to them. Or somebody who usually shows up 15 minutes early for work, now all of a sudden they're just showing up on time. Again, that's the person, there's not going to be any flags thrown there because they were on time. But there's been a change from what they normally do. I can remember when I used to show up an hour before shift. But after I started struggling with some of the coping habits that I was using, I ended up being the on-time person, or maybe even the 5-minute late person. But nothing ever happened because, 5 minutes, man, I'm glad you're here. That's not really late in my book. But I had a lot of things going on and I was struggling with a lot. But so now we're talking about an hour difference in what my normal response was. That was a big deal. And picking up on these things forces us to be in a difficult position. And we have conversations about having difficult conversations and what that looks like and how hard it is to have those difficult conversations. But it's a needed conversation. We need to do the check-ins. And I feel like, just speaking for myself, I think about doing way more than I actually do, such as with us traveling. We ride several hours going to places to teach and speak to folks, and several people will come across my mind. And man, I haven't talked to Scott in a year probably. I should call Scott. But then I don't call Scott, or he just wasn't acting right on that last shift, but hey, it ain't none of my business. I just need to stay out of it. We need to normalize it being okay to check on people and being able to get an honest response back from people. But again, that goes back to that trust. How do we have conversations with people that we don't normally have conversations with? So as we come to work, we need to humanize the job a little bit better. We come to work and I guess we just think that we're invincible and we put on this magic suit where nothing's going to bother us. It's a lot like driving the ambulance. We think that the ambulance is invincible. We don't think about if the wheel falls off of it. I've seen a wheel fall off of an ambulance, but we don't think about that when we're riding 80 or 90 miles an hour to a call. We think we're invincible, but we're not. And we need to humanize it way more than what we do. And we need to quit pretending that we can't be vulnerable.
I remember when I was a young paramedic in Texas, and one of the best supervisors, most influential people I ever was around, and who I do my best to emulate everything that he is and was. And one day I sat down, I just thought about him, and I said, what was it that just impressed me? What stood out about that particular supervisor? And it was, we would have 5 or 10 ambulances at the emergency department, and he would show up and he would quietly just clean your truck up, maybe put your monitor back together, maybe change the linen on your cot and clean up. And I always thought it was, how interesting or weird is that that's all he's doing. But in hindsight now, as I'm teaching classes and we're talking about these kinds of concepts, he was using that as a vehicle for conversation, to do, like you said, that check-in. He's not standing at the time clock to see if you're clocking in 30 minutes early or 5 minutes late, but he's doing that check-in. And he's just, how's it going? How was that last call? And just checking your demeanor, checking how things are going with you, and making that mental note. And so, it's not about big grandiose actions. It's about really subtle things. And if I know anything about Brad Lawson, I know that everything he does is on purpose, including the t-shirts that he wears that say healing isn't weakness. And so I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the skull with the beard to go with the man in the beard. But we're at a great time in EMS that this is something we talk about. Back in the day when you and I started, it was pack it in and move on to the next one. This, talking about your feelings or about how a call went, that was weakness. And this day and age, it's not. What's changing?
I think we're having the conversations. I think that the generational differences are fading as well. When we think, you said, when we started in this career, we were taught to just suck it up, deal with it, shove it down, don't ever think of it again. And, the men don't cry, all this stuff. I don't know about you, but that goes back to my childhood. I was taught as a kid, suck it up. If I got a whipping, I'm supposed to not even cry about getting a whipping. I'm supposed to suck it up. Big boys don't cry. Quit your complaining. Go do what I told you to do. It don't matter why, you do it because I told you to do it. And that's how we were raised. So we were programmed as a child to deal with emotions this way. And so thankfully, generational thoughts like that are sort of starting to go away. And I feel like that has a lot to do with how we are now. There's not as many people that are, disciplinarians like what we went through or like what our parents went through when we're talking about raising children. And so the thought processes are different now. So, I made sure to have conversations with both of my boys about it being completely okay to hurt, about it being completely okay to show emotion, because I don't want them to grow up and live the life that I've lived for the past 25 years. I want them to know that being vulnerable is not a sign of weakness, and that release is so much more important to us than we could ever come to understand. And I talk about, shoving trash into the hefty bag. Those hefty bags are really good, but they can only hold so much, and then it's going to bust. And I want my kids to know that it's completely okay to do those things, because I don't want them to bust like I've busted before, because it's really hard. Like, I've got my little stitches. There's little stitches going across my skull right there. It's healing isn't easy, but it's definitely not weakness. And we have to understand that these things that we've been through may never go away, but it's more about how we show up for the fight and how we reflect on ourselves and know what our capabilities are, and we know how to utilize tools better. I think that's a very important piece. And so having those conversations, having people now saying it's okay to cry if you're really sad about what you saw, that's humanizing this thing. And we've got a ways to go. We've still got folks who still feel like, if you can't take it, you shouldn't do this job. I see it all over social media all the time. I really wish those people would just quit. They're probably the same ones who undertreat their patients. They're probably the same ones who talk shit to patients and give ALS calls to BLS providers. And, I really wish they would go to Walmart or somewhere. Hobby Lobby, you don't even have to work on Sundays. This profession is not for everybody, but I do know that we have a great amount of people who didn't come into this profession as a calling. Some of these people came into the profession as a result of industry shutting down. Back in the 90s, I know there was a lot of folks that worked in, all of a sudden the shut down and they had to find employment. So we ended up with people in our workforce that they're not doing this because they truly care about people. They did it because, hey, this is something I can get a quick job, and they've kept it for 20 years. So I feel like we're starting to have more people who are passionate about the profession. And I know I'm probably going to catch it from some folks about what I just said. That's okay. But that's how I feel. And the test isn't hard. So there's lots of dummies walking around with paramedic credentials. That don't mean they're a paramedic. That don't mean they're a good paramedic. And it doesn't mean that they should be in this profession simply because they passed a test. If you're not a good human being, you just don't deserve to be in this profession. And so we're getting rid of some of the bad ones. And I think that we'll continue seeing better human beings in the job. And that's going to make the job a little bit easier. But it's definitely always going to be a process where we have to work on taking care of ourselves.
So, at the top of the show, we talked about a summit that you have coming up. Tell us about the First Responder Summit coming up. We talked about it's going to be in Wilmington, North Carolina in February of 2026. Who's going to be there? And what kind of topics, if you're attending, can you be looking forward to?
Yeah, so this really happened just without even really planning it. I started an event where I was going around doing the Saving Ourselves speaking event, talking about my background, some of the personal struggles that I've had in my career. And I had several folks reach out to me about it was inspiring to them and they would like to share their stories. And I think that's an important thing to do because I do know the value of the therapy that I've received just by being able to tell my own story. So I talked to some of them about let's get together and do something somewhere in the state. And it just continued to grow with people that wanted to be involved. So we went from talking about having a one-day opportunity for some people to speak to now it's a 2-day and there's like 44 speakers. And I think we have folks from over 8 states that will be attending. Some of the bigger names in the social media world, there's the Saudi paramedic. He has a really good social media following. He's got a couple really good books on mental wellness. He wrote one book about himself or about from the first responder perspective. And then he wrote a second book about from the husband-wife relationship perspective that I thought was very interesting. So I know both of those are available. I have both of those books, and they're really worth the read. So it'll be nice to have him here. He's a comedian, does a lot of little skit stuff, but has a really good speaking event based off of what he has in his book. So I'm excited about that. Paramedic Sophie's over in Tennessee, and she has been very vocal about, again, some of the horrible people that are just in the profession. And she's been very vocal about how, although she's tried to be nothing but positive and put inspirational things out into the world, it's still met by some just asshole people that just love tearing down anybody that they can. But I feel that drives her even more to continue putting out good leadership and good human being, good provider characteristics. So I love the angle that she speaks from, and I'm really interested to see her. And I know lots of people are excited about having her here. Man, we've got lots of folks. We've got lots of clinicians that I've never met before, but it was very intentional to get some clinicians in the room, because I feel like that's one of those stigmas that we've got to break. I sort of relate it to when I first started as an EMT, that uncomfortable feeling about being around a doctor until you realize a doctor is just some dude that went to school way longer than I did and he ain't nothing special. But breaking that stigma about clinicians are humans and they have a strong desire to help people, and that it's not the stereotypical, lay on the couch in the room and tell me your thoughts. That's not what all therapy looks like. So I'm really excited about having a bunch of different therapy options and different clinician specialties available for people to see just what's out there. Some others in the 911 dispatch world, Nocturnal Dispatchers, that's a group on Facebook. Cody's in Indiana, but he does a lot of really good stuff. I ran across around the time that Robeson County had the mass shooting where they had 13 shot on a scene here a couple months ago. And I've started finding out what Cody does with his nonprofit. They have significant stressful situations across the country. His nonprofit usually connects with departments and sends them gift cards, maybe caters a meal for them, just loves on them however they can from a distance. And I thought that was really awesome. He did that for the Robeson County group. And so he's actually going to be here with us and do a speaking event with us. So tons of folks, but no matter if you're a firefighter, law enforcement, EMS, or if you're in the clinician world, this is an opportunity for all of us to just, number one, come together and love on each other a little bit, strengthen our networks, and just show that we're all human beings that just care about other human beings. There's nothing formal about this conference. Matter of fact, when I sent out the selection emails for the speakers, I told them they can't even wear business attire. Business attire is not allowed at my conference. I'm probably going to be in some shorts and flip-flops, if I'm completely honest with you, and that's what I expect everybody else to be in, because, again, I want this to be about the human beings behind the badges. I don't want this to be this formal, I have to dress up and speak like this because I'm a professional. I want us to put all that shit to the side and just be open and honest as human beings that can relate to the things that we're seeing in the world, and strengthen our networks. That way, next time there's a situation and somebody's not doing good, you know exactly what to say or who to send them to. I don't need to fix the world. I just need to know that I can send them to this guy or I can send them to this gal, and they can take the next step with them. That's what's important, because I can tell you from being in a dark place, there's not a whole lot of time for wait and let me call a few people and get back to you in a couple days. There's just not time for that. And if you feel more prepared, you're more inclined to have that difficult conversation. So if I can give you some more tools for your tool bag, it's a lot like somebody who's experienced a loss in their family. What do you say to that person? Well, if I can help you find some good conversation starters, you're more likely to have that conversation instead of you see them and turn and go the other way. So that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and I imagine there's probably Only a couple spaces left in the conference this year if you haven't gotten your ticket yet, but I imagine that this is going to take off like wildfire. This will be successful in its first year, and it'll just continue to build and grow and be successful. So if you don't get the opportunity to go this year, most certainly circle it on your calendar for next year, and make sure you get to the First Responder Wellness Summit. And like we talked about offline, it's not just for EMS, fire, law enforcement, our dispatchers, clinicians. It's for everybody, because it takes a village to address what it is that we're doing, and to address this very important topic. Well, as we close out, like I always love to do with all of my guests, is that I want our guests to have the last word, the best word. So, Brad, what is it that you want our listeners to walk away with? What is it that you want them to know, that most important piece of information from today's episode?
I think that if there's just one thing I want people to take away from this episode is never sell yourself short. You know, a lot of times we can look at all the problems in the world, and it's very easy to say, I'm just one person, I can't do miracles. But it only takes one person to start the initiative. And it's amazing to see how many people will step up and follow you and support you and help you make things happen. That's exactly what happened with this First Responder Mental Wellness Summit. This was just well, if I can, I will. And then people started showing up to make this happen. So many times I've doubted myself. There's so many times I wanted to do more than I've done with my life. And the longer you wait, the harder it gets. And you can really start devaluing yourself. So make sure that you know that you can accomplish huge things if you set your mind to it. The rest of the people will show up and follow you, and you can make a difference in the world, and that's what we're trying to do.
Making a difference in the world, taking care of one another, making sure that we are our best selves for our patients, for our partners and our peers. Man, what is such an important topic to talk about today. So, that's it for this episode of the Red River Medic podcast, where we break rules, challenge norms, and try to save lives. I want to thank our guest, Brad Lawson from Pierce Provisions. You can check out more about what Brad and his organization, his company, has at his website in Pierce Provisions. You can go to any search engine and it will lead you directly to his webpage. Regardless of what great information that you heard today, remember, you got to follow your own local protocols and medical direction and your organizational policies and procedures. If you are experiencing a mental health or wellness crisis, please reach out to your agency leadership, your EAP program, or a similar program that you guys might have. You can also call or text 988 from any phone, no matter where in the country you're at. It's free, it's confidential. You're going to be connected with a crisis counselor to speak with. And I think the most important thing is that you are not alone. You are not alone. Well, remember, leadership isn't about titles. It's about action, attitude, and having the guts to do things differently. If you like what you heard, share this podcast, and let's be the change that we all need and want in EMS. So stay curious, stay bold, and never stop learning. We'll catch you next time. Same river, same chaos, new ideas. Have a great day, everybody.